I'm glad you mentioned Georgia, because we're going to bring in one of those US representatives, Congresswoman Bourdeaux, in the Democratic representative for Georgia's 7th district. You can see that she is sitting at home and not in the House of Representatives. Congresswoman, lovely to have you with us. So the National Guard will stay for another 2 months. You've been scattered to the four winds. What's it going to take to return things to normal in Washington?
Well, I really hope we can get to a place where we're beyond these threats. And just to go back, though, about Congress leaving, the House only had a couple more votes to take and just decided it was not worth staying all day on Thursday to take 2 votes and just pulled it into Wednesday evening. We had been there working on some really big bills. So we'd worked on the COVID relief package, a voting rights package, as well as the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And so, I mean, a lot of us were ready to go home at that point and get back to our district and get back to the people.
We've been listening through the course of the week to a committee hearing on what went wrong on January 6th. And yesterday we heard from the head of the DC National Guard, who said it took 3 and a bit hours, 3 hours, 19 minutes to get his troops to Capitol Hill, even though he'd had a phone call much earlier. Do you feel safer as a result of the inquiries that have been held?
Yes, and I do think we need to continue to press on it and really get to the bottom of what happened on that day. It was just such a difference, what happened on January 6th and what had happened when there were protests previously, such as the Black Lives Matter protests. There was just a lot more security around the Capitol and around the White House. And sort of why that didn't happen is still a bit of an open question.
And Congresswoman, you describe yourself as a pragmatist. You're one of in fact, the only Democrat who flipped a Republican seat. How do you see yourself trying to bridge this gap between your Republican colleagues who continue to insist that there was widespread electoral fraud without evidence, and then yourselves, the Democrats last night, passed this important bill, an expansion of the Voting Rights Act, which will allow more early voting and other things. How are you going to bridge that gap between these two sides, which is so difficult?
Well, there's several pieces to that. One, on the voting rights side, that's something, it's just patient communication with people on that front. And what we've seen in Georgia in response to the Georgia elections and the Democratic victories is that the Republican legislature introduced a whole host of pieces of legislation to curtail voting. And so really shocking. And I don't think that's something that most Georgians really agree with. This is all voters, not just Democratic voters, who are going to really face some restrictions. And that's why the For the People Act, H.R. 1, was so important. It's about expanding voting rights, making sure that everybody has a chance to vote, and making sure that every vote gets counted.
The one thing I really couldn't understand was the editorial that the former Vice President Mike Pence wrote this week. Someone who escaped with his life from the Capitol building. There were threats to hang him. This is what he wrote about that voting bill that we've just been talking about. He says, after an election marked by significant voting irregularities and numerous instances of officials setting aside state election law, I share the concern of millions of Americans about the integrity of the 2020 election. So a man who came so close on January 6th is again feeding this idea that in some way the election was stolen.
Yeah, and again, we're just going to have to communicate patiently on this, that there were no serious voting problems in 2020. That was a free and fair election, and we need to continue to have that going forward. We need to make sure that everybody can vote. We make it easy for people to vote, and we make it a fair election. And I think all of the American people are on board with that, and we need to just be patient and keep working and pressing on that message.
Congresswoman Congresswoman Bourdeaux, lovely to have you on the programme again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, of course, the authorities were worried, Laura, that there were going to be lots of Trump supporters coming to Washington this week. And if you were a journalist looking to speak to some of those QAnon followers, the best